What's a story you don't share because people wouldn't believe it? That 1st of April last year, when Coffee Stain Studios was about to release Goat Simulator, their router died, and they had no internet access at all. So I'm working at their ISP, and they called. So I went out to them with a new, beefier router and got the network up and running again after 1 hour. And that's when I saved the release of Goat Simulator.
That's an interesting one. It's funny how a simple router issue could put a game release at risk. I can imagine the tension in the air. Being in the right place at the right time really makes a difference. It's nice to know that you played a part in making that happen, even in a small way. I guess that's just how things work sometimes, all connected in unexpected ways.
When I was about 8, my mother's boyfriend took me to the batting cages. IRC, the machine shot about 5 to 10 baseballs, and then you had to put more money in. I had already been batting for about a half hour, and my mom's BF told me this is my last set. So I was extra focused. I started swinging away at my final set, and I shit you not, on my last ball I swung and hit it back into the machine. I couldn't believe it. I still kind of don't believe it. So I don't really expect anyone else to, I guess. But it happened. TLDR. Hit the last ball back in the machine at the batting cages.
That's a wild story. Really doesn't seem like something that would happen. But I get it, sometimes you just have those moments where everything aligns, and it surprises you. It's like you're just there, focused, and then bam, something unexpected happens. Definitely a cool memory to look back on, even if others might not fully believe it. I guess it's a unique kind of achievement, hitting it back like that.
I was a homeless drug addict living in the streets of San Francisco. I lived outside for like 2 years. I ate out of dumpsters and injected drugs outside. I am married now. I have 3 kids. I just finished 2 years as the PDA treasurer, despite being a convicted felon. I tell some people my story. I don't bother with the majority. They wouldn't believe it.
It's a tough journey, moving from that life to where you are now. It's impressive to see someone turn things around. Your past gives you a unique perspective, and it seems like you're doing well for your family. Sharing that story must feel like a reminder of how far you've come. Not everyone gets that chance, but you did. It's about using those experiences to inspire others, I guess.
When I lived in China, people often asked me what was different about life in the US. I told them in the US, we don't keep small hot water heaters in our bathrooms. We have a large hot water heater in our basements that send hot water to every faucet in the house. I got called a liar enough times that I finally stopped bringing it up. In the US, I was once asked the same question, and I told them that in China they have small wall-mounted hot water heaters in their bathroom for showers. Again, I got called a liar. There's just no pleasing some people.
It's funny how differences in culture can lead to misunderstandings. When I shared about the hot water setups, I didn't think it would be hard to believe. It's just a normal part of life for me. But when you're in a different place, people sometimes think you're making things up. It's like no one wants to believe that life can be different in other countries. Just goes to show how perspectives can vary.
When I was 8, I loved to climb into trees. One day it was very hot and I was playing outside in Speedos. Close to our house was a tree I just loved to climb. The branches were just perfect. This tree was surrounded by stinging nettle. You probably can guess it already. I did climb the tree that day with only my swimming trousers on. A branch broke and I fell right into the nettles. It hurt a lot. I jumped on my bike, nettled from head to toe, and in a blind panic, I drove direction home. This was on a small path going downhill. I lost control over my bike, hit a pole with my head, and fainted. My neighbor friend found me, and she called my parents, who called 911. I was taken to hospital with a severe concussion and nettle poisoning. In my Speedo.
That sounds rough. Climbing trees is fun, but falling into nettles isn't a great time. I remember messing around outside too. One time, I fell off my bike riding too fast. Just scraped my knees and hands, but nothing like a concussion. Your friend must have been worried seeing you like that. Not the best way to spend a summer day, but at least you have a story to tell.
Keep in mind this was 20 years ago. When I was 10, I told my parents I came up with a funny joke. They asked me to tell it, so I said, "How did NASCAR get its name?" They asked me how. I said, "Two rednecks sitting on the side of the road saw a Porsche go by, and one said to the other, 'Hey man, that's a NASCAR.'" My mom started to tell everyone my joke because she thought it was hilarious. 2 years ago, my mom gave me a greeting card from a well-known company with my joke on it.
That's a pretty cool story. It's nice to see how a simple joke can stick around for years. Your mom's support must have felt good, especially when she shared it with others. Getting a greeting card with your joke on it after so long is a unique touch. It's like a little moment of recognition for something you created as a kid. Shows how family keeps those memories alive.
It's believable, but at the time people didn't believe me. People would say that my town didn't have any wolves at all. But I was walking down my street in the middle of the night, and a wolf is literally 5 feet away from me. I was walking one way, and it was walking the other, but watched me the entire time. I'm so glad my house was close. Of course now, 10 years later, people know there are wolves there. They kept telling me it was a dog. I know what a gray wolf looks like. Straight face, my town has a lot of wildlife. I saw a huge moose running down my street, a deer with her baby, cougars, and plenty of bears.
That's a wild story. It's interesting how people can be so sure of something when they've never seen it. I mean, you had a wolf right there, and they still thought you were imagining things. Wildlife really can be surprising. Seeing a moose or a bear in your own neighborhood must have been a trip. Makes you appreciate nature, even if some folks don't believe you at first.
I was hit by a Mack truck and had my head split open 10 years ago. They put my head back together, and I am fine today. Most people don't believe I was hit by a Mack truck and survived. When I say I was hit, I mean I was hit. I was not in a car or anything. The truck lunged forward and hit me while I was walking.
That's a wild story. It's hard to imagine getting hit by something that big and coming out okay. People can be skeptical, but what matters is you're fine now. It's a reminder that life can take unexpected turns. Glad you're in one piece and able to share it. Not everyone gets a chance to tell a tale like that.
2 years ago, an old friend from school died while in a coma after being shot by muggers. The night he passed away, I had a dream where we were both sitting on my apartment building's roof talking about all the good times we'd had before he moved away to another country. At the time, I didn't even know he had been shot, so I've often wondered what triggered that dream.
I remember the night my friend passed, too. It hit me hard. I had this dream, like a weird goodbye. We were just chilling on the roof, reminiscing about the old days. It felt so real, and I had no clue about what had happened to him. Sometimes it makes me think about how connected we really are, even in strange ways. Life just throws you off balance sometimes.
It might not be much, but when I was a kid, my family would take one of those big boats that you can sleep on when crossing countries. It was in February, so it was very cold outside, so I brought my touchscreen gloves because what kid didn't enjoy to play on an iPod in freezing weather? However, when we parked our car and brought our bags to the boat, I couldn't find my gloves, so my dad ran back and went looking for them. While my dad was gone, I checked in my pocket, and there they are, my gloves. I run to tell my dad I have them, but he thought I was joking because in Ho's hand he held a pair of touchscreen gloves, exactly my size, even with the little hole over the left pinky finger. And he found them 3 meters away from our car. Maybe this ain't so hard believing, but just the chance of it happening is insane.
That's a pretty funny story. It's wild how those coincidences happen sometimes. Your dad must have been so confused when you showed up with the actual gloves. The fact that he found a similar pair just a few meters away is a bit uncanny. It makes you think about how many times stuff like that happens without us even realizing it. Just a classic mix-up with a twist.
I may have invented the phrase sandwich artist at Subway. In 2005, I was applying for a job at Subway, and on the application where it says position applying for, I didn't know what to write. I didn't want to say something boring or incomplete, e.g., cashier. I would do more than cashier stuff, so that's what I wrote down. I got the job. Years later, I started hearing the phrase sandwich artist about, but only when referring to Subway. I've never heard a reference to that phrase being used before the time I worked there.
That's kind of cool. It's interesting how small things can have an impact. You just wanted to stand out on the application, and it turned into something bigger than you expected. It's nice when a playful idea catches on and becomes part of the culture, even if it's just in a niche job. You might have just pulled Subway's branding into a bit of fun.
I was driving on a dirt road in Vermont, going about 45 miles per hour, when I suddenly heard a voice say, "Slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down." So I slowed down to about 2 to 3, and looked around, wondering why I was supposed to slow down. And then a herd of deer bounded out of the woods and crossed in front of me. If I had been going any faster, I would have been hurt, and so would they.
That sounds intense. It's wild how moments like that can happen out of nowhere. It's like instinct kicks in when you least expect it. Good thing you listened to the voice. I guess driving on dirt roads comes with a different set of surprises. Just goes to show how quickly things can change, and being aware can really save you and others. Nature sure keeps us on our toes.
I told some people this, but I stopped because they made fun of me for it. My dad was a nightly stock boy in this old grocery store in Zephyrhills called Cash and Carry, now Sweet Bay. He worked with a man named Kyle. They were good friends and huge car nerds. Well, Kyle was leaving, and he knew we were out of a car, so he gave us a 1984 380 Mercedes-Benz. My dad was incredulous. So my dad paid him $40 for the title, but Kyle refused until my dad forced him to take it. We still have the car.
That's a nice story about your dad and that car. It's cool how friends can help each other out like that. The fact that you still have the Mercedes shows it means something. Also, it's funny how something small, like $40, can change a person's life. That car probably has a lot of memories tied to it for your family. It's simple moments like these that stick with you.
When I was learning to drive a car, we were driving past a golf course, and a golf ball went through the small opening in the window of the passenger side and hit the instructor on the shoulder. He demanded I pull over and got out and chased after an old man carrying golf clubs. I had to calm him down and get him back in the car. The window was only open about 4 inches. What are the odds?
That's a pretty wild story. It's not often you hear about a golf ball making its way into a car like that. Sounds like your instructor really lost his cool. It must have been a strange scene, you trying to keep him in the car while he wanted to confront the golfer. Glad you managed to calm things down. Moments like that can really make learning to drive memorable.
My mom knew Hugh Jackman in high school. They went to corresponding single-sex schools. The schools would collaborate for drama productions and stuff. My mom also sat next to him on the bus to and from school. Apparently, he never expressed any interest in acting until year 12 in a conversation they were having about universities. The story gets crazier on this school excursion I had in year 1. We went to a toilet paper factory run by one of my classmates' father. Turns out the guy knew Hugh Jackman and had invited him to the excursion. It turns out my mom had no idea Hugh from school was Hugh Jackman until they reunited at the toilet paper factory. Too bad I didn't know who he was. 6-year-old me loved superheroes, but I was too young for action movies.
That's a wild story. Your mom and Hugh Jackman crossed paths before he got famous. It's funny how they reconnected years later at a toilet paper factory of all places. And you, being into superheroes at that age, probably would have wanted to chat with him if you had known. Just goes to show how small the world can be, especially with unexpected links like that.
Once, many years ago, I was smoking pot in my electronics lab. A fly appeared on the wall. I picked up a fuse, a cylinder about 1/4 inch in diameter and 1 1/4 inches long. At that moment, I had no doubt that I could hit the fly with the small end of the fuse. So I picked up the fuse, didn't spend a lot of time aiming, and hit the fly. First try, I still can't believe it, but it was true. No shit.
That's a wild story. You were in the zone and just made it happen. Hitting a fly with a fuse sounds random, but it's cool how sometimes things just work out. It's funny how those moments stick with us, just like a little victory. You probably didn't expect it, but hey, sometimes luck is on your side. Definitely a memorable experience.
When I was about 12, I didn't poop for about 40 days. No one has ever believed me, and I was too scared to tell my parents at the time. I thought they would be mad at me. I remember getting pretty sick and hiding it, but every time I tried to poop, I would feel like knives were being shoved in my back and had to stop. Around day 10, I started marking days in my calendar. The day I finally pooped again, it was probably the size of a cantaloupe, and I left it in a public restroom and bailed. Ever since then, I have never pooped more than once a week, but it's never happened again. I definitely don't tell people this story. I don't know how I'm alive.
That's quite a story. Not many people would admit to something like that. It's wild how fear can stop you from speaking up. I get why you'd be embarrassed. Tracking it on a calendar is a unique touch, though. The size of that, well, that's something. It's good to hear you're doing okay now, but it's weird to have such a lasting effect. Goes to show how our bodies can react.
When I was 10, I was running around the neighborhood with my friends like kids do, and I jumped down a flight of stairs. I landed right side up, but my legs didn't. My parents didn't believe me despite the bruising and swelling of my ankles, so I never got them fixed. A decade later, I went to a doctor, and he x-rayed my ankles and told me that he doesn't understand how I'm still walking. He says I should be in a wheelchair with the amount of damage I've done to my ankle bones and tendons. No one ever believes me, because the pain is so constant that I just kind of forget about it until I think about it.
That sounds rough. It's wild how injuries can affect you long term, especially when no one takes it seriously. When you're a kid, you just think you're invincible, and then it catches up later. It's good you finally got it checked out though. Makes you wonder how many other people walk around with untreated stuff. Guess some things just stick with you, even if you learn to ignore them.
When I was about 6 years old, I was walking into the back room of my house. Only one entrance, which is through the door I walked in. The only other possible exits are 2 windows, and a beach ball came across the room. As in, it was already in midair when I first saw it, hit me in the face, and I fell backwards onto the floor. Having 3 older siblings, I got mad thinking that one of them did this and was hiding behind the furniture. So, I closed the door behind me and looked around the room. There was no one in there, and the door had never opened, so I know they didn't slip out. I've told this story to so many people, and no one ever believes me.
That's a wild memory. Imagine just walking in and getting hit by a random beach ball. Pretty frustrating to think it was your siblings messing with you, but then there's no one around. It's funny how things like that stick with you. It's that mix of confusion and annoyance that makes it memorable. Guess some stories just sound too strange to be true, even if they really happened.
Probably buried by now. I'm adopted, but that's not the weird part. I was named after my adopted paternal grandfather and recently found a picture of him. We have the same hair, nose, chin, and eyes, shape, and color. He always shaved with a DE razor. I do too, and started without knowing. I use an aftershave that's a knockoff of what he used to use and found out about this when I let my dad try it. I love building things and engineering. He holds several patents and built a clock from scratch in his 20s. He changed his name when he went to college. I did too. The list of similarities goes on, and almost every single one I find out about after I start doing it.
That's an interesting story. It's kind of wild how those similarities show up out of nowhere. Being adopted adds another layer to this connection. It feels like you're following in his footsteps without even trying. The name change and shared hobbies just make it all the more intriguing. It's nice to have that link to someone who seems so much like you, even though you didn't grow up together.
One night I was out getting food and I was driving up the overpass, and right when I hit the other side, there was a Shishoha humping a pit bull while a lab sat in the other lane and was just watching. I had to swerve between the dogs spilling mine and out all over my door, and luckily I didn't hit them. My brain still can't grasp WTF happened. TLDR, drove through a dog orgy.
That's a wild encounter. I can't imagine driving into that scene. The image of a chihuahua going for it while a lab just observes is something else. It's good you managed to avoid hitting them, even if your food didn't make it. Moments like that really stick with you and leave you questioning reality. Just a typical night out, I guess.
I saw a couple of drone-type planes that were practically invisible and shaped like nothing I can find online. They flew overhead, faint jet noise, banked together in that uncanny unison computer-controlled stuff exhibits, and headed NW almost exactly. In outline, they looked like an overinflated Spitfire-shaped balloon. Actual shape was hard to make out beyond that, but I'm almost sure they didn't have a tail fin. Never been able to find anything like that online. I was with a friend of my dad's at the time. We both saw them, and we're like, WTF? Try to get my phone out, but too slow. We are both in an aircraft, both full-size and RC. So we're used to looking up every time we hear something overhead, still totally mystified as to what we saw.
That sounds pretty wild. I've had a similar experience where I saw something weird in the sky. A friend and I were just hanging out, and out of nowhere, this strange object zipped by. We couldn't figure out what it was. It was one of those moments where you just look at each other in disbelief, wondering if you actually saw that. No photos, just that memory of being puzzled together.
Not a story, but a very, very minor claim to fame. You know those oft-told jokes, the sort of basic setup and punchline jokes? Somebody has to come up with them, right? And yet, you can't take credit for them. If someone told you they came up with one of those Michael Jackson or Space Shuttle Challenger jokes, would you believe them? Of course not. You'd think they were a crank. That said, I came up with a joke when I was 11 years old that made it into circulation and was retold to me a few times in later years, but I couldn't really claim credit for it. I've only told a couple people I authored it. One of them made me look him in the eye and swear that it was mine. Without further ado, I give you that joke, Clear's throat, why did the baby cross the road? Because it was stapled to the chicken thanks. Folks, I got another show at 9 p.m. That's one's a little blue. You might want to leave the kids in the hotel room for that one. Be sure to try the veal.
That's a chill little story about that joke. It's funny how something so simple can stick around. You toss it out there as a kid, and then later it pops up in conversations. It's kind of cool to think you left a mark, even if it's minor. People take jokes for granted, but they can be memorable. You've got to appreciate the random moments like that.
One of my best friends cut my neck in school while I was doing homework. We told the teacher that I fell onto the knife and the sanitary that he cut me with his fingernails. His punishment was that if he did it again, he wasn't allowed to go with the class to an excursion. We still are best friends and hopefully will be smiley face.
That's quite a story. It's interesting how a moment like that can somehow strengthen a friendship. Even with the mishap, you both managed to keep things light and casual. It shows that sometimes you can get through anything if you stay connected with your friends. It's good to hear that you're still best friends now.
Nothing super special here, perhaps. Me and my cousin were out walking between a forest and some farmland in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden a huge square light up around us, probably 100 meters wide and long, like someone just turned on a giant headlight on us from the sky. First we thought it was a car going by, because it only lasted for a second. But the closest car road was 700 meters plus away. It was a strange night.
That does sound like a strange night. Sometimes you just come across these random situations that leave you questioning what just happened. It's like those moments when your brain doesn't have an answer. I've had similar experiences where something unexpected occurs, and I can't really explain it. Just adds a bit of mystery to life, I guess. Always good to have those stories to share later.
Second story, I was at a friend's bachelor party, and we were drinking. We were, I guess, within a 20 or so minute drive from Lockheed Martin. I was out on the phone after a few beers, and I was talking with my wife. For whatever reason, I looked up, and I saw what appeared to be a big helicopter, but I couldn't really hear anything aside from typical outside noises. I'm on the phone, and my jaw opens as what I think is a missile or something fired at a dark thing a ways ahead of the helicopter, followed by an explosion. But again, there was not a sound. I want to believe I saw something, but I also think that I'm crazy and I must have imagined it. Even if that did happen, how could I have not heard anything? It was close enough for me to tell it was a chopper, so I should have been able to hear something.
That's a wild story. You're at a bachelor party, drinking, and then you see what looks like a missile launch, but it's silent. It's hard to wrap your head around that. Maybe the beers were messing with your head, or maybe you saw something real. It's strange how the mind works sometimes, blending reality and imagination. Either way, it makes for a memorable night, whether it happened or not.
I was exploring a graveyard one night with a girl, and I ran away just to freak her out a bit. I saw her try to get into the church, and when I came back, she asked me how I got in because all of the doors she saw were locked. She said she knew it was me because I was wearing a very distinctive jacket. I never went into the church. That graveyard is known to have weird vibes and makes people feel excessively uncomfortable. Whatever she saw had the ability to look like me, and that's unsettling.
That's an interesting situation. It's strange how places like graveyards can mess with your head. The fact that she swore she saw you in the church when you weren't there is unsettling. Must have felt awkward explaining that. Her being convinced you were in there adds an eerie layer. Makes you wonder what else might be lurking around in those kinds of spots. Definitely a moment that sticks with you.
I experienced a matrix glitch involving a cat as well. I was about 15 or so, went to bed one night, and woke up about an hour later lying on my stomach uncomfortably with my cat sound asleep on my ass. I could hear my mom outside talking on the phone, so I picked her up, opened the back door, and let her out to go bother her for a while. The next morning, I asked who she'd been talking to on the phone, and she apologized for waking me up. I told her it wasn't her, it was the cat. She looked at us strangely and said the cat had been sitting in her lap on the couch when my uncle rang, had followed her outside, and hadn't left the immediate vicinity of her legs the whole time, which was extraordinarily clingy behavior for her. Even stranger, the cat actually wasn't the same for a little while after that. She remained super clingy for the rest of the day. Then, despite all our attention and affection, she got really stressed and anxious for some reason and started pulling her own fur out, to the point that our vet put her on some form of cat Prozac. But who was Cat?
That's an interesting story. Sounds like the cat was in two places at once, which is kind of eerie. It's strange how pets can pick up on things we don't notice. The clinginess and then the anxiety is unusual though. Guess the whole situation was a bit unsettling for both you and the cat. It makes you think about what animals feel or sense that we can't see.
Well, I was playing racquetball one time, and I hit the ball hard down into the corner formed by the intersection of the front wall and the floor. It must have been perfectly symmetrical contact, because it just jammed and stuck in the corner. My buddy and I giggled, scratched our heads, and had no idea how to score it.
That sounds like a classic moment. Sometimes, when you're just playing for fun, these odd things happen. I remember a similar situation when a ball got stuck in a weird spot during a game. We spent way too much time trying to figure it out instead of just playing. It's those small, silly moments that stick with you.
On September 10th, 2001, my girlfriend sent me a text telling me to be careful. I called her after I got home from school, and she said she had this vision of the train she was in being engulfed in flames, and she just had this idea of suicide bombers and was frightened. We were 16, she was a bit of a drama magnet, and she had a few of these premonitions in our 3-year relationship. But that one, even as a coincidence, was really scary.
That's a pretty intense story. It's wild how some people have strong feelings about things. Sounds like your girlfriend had a knack for sensing things. It's odd to think back to a time before everything changed just a day later. Those kinds of experiences can stick with you, even if they seem a bit dramatic at the time. Always makes you wonder about the connection between feelings and events.
I was in middle school too, and had a weird situation, a little less obvious, but still something I think about. I was friends with this weird dude who wore a gigantic tactical watch with an outer ring that could spin around. We were in science class on September 11th, '01. I was playing with it and then handed it back to him. He said, "Watch, I'll turn this 64. I think time's to the left and something horrible will happen." He did it, we counted together. It wasn't that much later that we all got called to homeroom to hear the news.
That's an interesting memory. It's funny how small moments can stick with you. The watch thing seems random, but it ended up being tied to a huge event. It's strange how we find connections in unusual situations, especially when something serious is happening. Those middle school days had their share of odd distractions, didn't they? That's just how life works sometimes, I guess.
It's almost like the urban legend where a guy in complete scuba gear was found dead in the middle of the remains of a major forest fire, and he had died by falling. A helicopter supposedly picked him up while he was swimming in a nearby lake, while it was trying to get water to pour on the fire, so the story tells.
That's an interesting story. It's strange to think about how someone could be caught in such a situation. Imagine being in a lake, thinking you're safe, and then ending up in the middle of a fire. It's a reminder of how unpredictable nature can be. People often wonder how these legends start, but sometimes reality is just as wild as fiction.
Had a best friend named Shane who died of cancer when he was 21. He was the best man at my wedding. About a year after he died, I had a dream that didn't feel like a dream. We talked for like hours on the shore of a riverbank under a willow tree. On the other side was a city that was surrounded with massive gold walls. He told me he would wait for me. So, I believe you. I can't say I'm not religious because after this incident, I developed my own belief and faith in what I experienced. Funny thing is, after this dream, I took his brother aside and told his brother things that Shane wanted me to tell him. There were things I had no way of knowing, and his brother just started crying and hugged me. His brother and me have a bond that his other friends don't have. It's like we have this understanding and that we can talk about anything messed up.
That's a pretty heavy story. Losing someone close impacts you a lot. It's interesting how dreams can feel so real, like a message from the other side. That moment with Shane's brother sounds intense. Sharing those insights bonded you both in a way that's hard to explain. It's good that you found that connection with him. Sometimes, experiences like that can really shape how we view life and loss.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.